Welcome back to another car ride conversations with the House Huddle. I hope the road noise isn't too loud this time. However, the topic that just came to mind is meaningful conversations that parents should be having with their young adults, and when is it appropriate to have these conversations even with your adult children. And I feel like there is a fine line, because depending on how you were raised, depending on your religious beliefs, and how society has shaped your opinions and views, I really just challenge you to take a moment and pause from what you have always believed or what you've always been taught, and hear me out on this, because I know many people who will straight up tell you, do not go talk to your parents about your spouse, like in a negative light. And I think that's twofold, because you want to feel like your child, and it should be your child and your in-law, like your daughter or son-in-law, feels comfortable enough to be able to come and say, like, man, this is just driving me bonkers. Like, I can't figure it out. I've troubleshot everything. I don't get it. Like, I just don't get it. And let's take something, for example, similar to the Watts case. You've got a husband who is working, and he's working a traditional job, and you've got a stay-at-home wife who is there to take care of the kids. And one of the controversial things about Shanann is that the girls were in preschool. And what does that look like when, let's just say, keep in mind that Shanann also was working the MLM? And how would this conversation go? So I think about it in the terms of, my oldest son is a young man. When he gets married, let's just say his wife comes and says, I don't get it. He's always frustrated, or he doesn't really, I don't know, like, my son's pretty introverted as well. So, he doesn't really express things to me, but I can tell that something's bothering him. I can tell that he's frustrated. And how, as a mother, would you, oh goodness, car accident. How would you, as a mother, handle the situation? Because obviously you don't want to meddle. You don't want to necessarily be in the middle. But as a mom, and like I said, my son, when they get married, their wives become my daughters. And so I'm going to love and nurture and be there for them just as much as I am my own child. So let's just say, girl talk, this is a subject that comes up. And it's, okay, well, have you talked to him? Would be my first question. Yeah, but he says nothing's wrong, because that's what most men say. No offense, guys, but it's true. You say, hey, what's wrong? Nothing. Same goes for women. I will not even remotely try to deny that. So, okay, so the superficial conversation has not broken through. So then my suggestion would be to lead with, I know, acknowledge the hard work that your spouse is doing. I understand that you're working hard to provide for the family. And, I'm doing the best that I can to help in every area possible. Whether it means the wife is working a side hustle, or, the MLM talk would be a whole different conversation. But, there's plenty of side hustles like door dashing and things like that wives can do that are staying at home to, spend time, take care of their kids. And so the conversation would essentially come around and say, okay, so you both make, let's just keep it neutral. You both make relatively decent money. Yes, your budget, I could see where it's pretty tight. What areas could you guys cut back in? And you don't even have to get that detailed into what's going on in their finances. But just say, hey, it might be time to have a budget meeting together and sit down and really go over the finances. Like, figure out where you're bleeding money. And then if you can free up, say, an extra $200 a month, and that money's going in savings, then that in itself is essentially creating a savings and money for your family, which in turn is going to relieve your husband, because you got to figure out what burdens he feels like he's carrying. And I just, the conversation could go in so many ways. And I know some of you are probably rolling your eyes and you're thinking, yeah, right, Ashley, this is never, we're talking about in-laws, etc. But I'm telling you, the only way that this world is going to see a change is for us to become the parents and the in-laws that we always needed. And if I've learned anything about parenting my own children, it's that while we may love, admire, and, I love my parents dearly. And they were great parents, and then they were horrible parents. There's things that I learned how to not do from watching my parents. And then there are things that I learned, like, hey, that worked. That actually is a good practice. And that's what we're all doing. So before anyone shoots down the idea, I will tell you, I do believe in the Bible. And so I am pretty firm when it comes to the leave and cleave, scriptures and what all that entails when you get married. And I do believe that. But we've also got to keep in mind, and I really wonder if this is where Cindy struggled, was keep in mind that from the time that your young adult children go from 18 to 20 to 21, if they're still not married, you should still very much be trying to continuously evolve and nurture that parent relationship, because through that, you're going to get to know your child as an adult. And then when they get married, you're going to have a better gauge and idea of, okay, he when he closes down, he's frustrated, or when he does this, it's that. And then when your daughter-in-law or your son-in-law comes to you and is like, Mom, I just don't get it, and they get to their wits' end, you'll have like a 1 or 2 sentence line to come back at them, and they'll say, oh, I didn't think about that. Or, like most kids, no matter how old you get, your parents will tell you something and you'll resist it at first because you don't dare want to acknowledge that your parents' right. But if you've maintained and established this healthy adult relationship with your adult children, then that's not, again, the relationships that were strained and forced in the past, whether that was your parents or your grandparents or your aunts or uncles or anything like that, that can change with you. That can change with me. And the only way that crimes and just this horrible tragedy is going to remotely begin to shift so that we can hopefully prevent these things from happening is we've got to teach our children and our young adults how to communicate. Texting and passive-aggressive statuses on social media, cutting people off the moment they offend you, just not being able to have difficult conversations, that's not healthy, and that's not okay on either side. It's not okay for Chris Watts to have silently played the role and never stood up for what he was believing or what he was thinking. You cannot tell me that a grown man going out into the field, having these long days, out in the weather like he was, you can't tell me he's blindly going and doing that. His money's going into a bank account and he has absolutely zero clue about how things are getting paid or how much. There is no way that he does not know how much money is in that bank account. He may not pay all the bills. She may be the one that does the online or did the online payments or took the money into places or mailed it off. She may have been the one to do the taxes, etc. But you think for a second, if you can't go out for a $30 meal, that you're not having a conversation between each other going, hey, our bank account's going to, overdraft if you charge that card, so don't charge anything. I mean, let's be real, guys. It's not, the woman was the main and only problem in this. The problem was he never was a leader in that family. He was not a man and a husband in the context of, looking at her and saying, hey, we need to sit down and figure this out. Because even as an in-law, the first thing would have been, why are you paying X, Y, and Z? Even if they got a scholarship for the girls' schooling, even if it's an extra $300 a month, whether you're paying $2,000 or $300 a month for childcare, but you are working from home and not generating enough money to offset that expense, then that expense would be cut. And Shanann had their playroom set up very nicely with books and a table. And she very much comes across as someone who maybe would have been able to do homeschooling for like preschool. But again, we got to keep in mind the ages of these girls when all of this happened. They were 4 and 3. And preschool and kindergarten is a legit thing. 3K, 4K, and 5K is a real thing here in the States. So it wasn't like they were just randomly going. And, there's also, I do know because I've checked with the school, there are scholarship opportunities for people, and the income-based requirements for that vary. And once you're locked into it, you're locked into it. No matter how much you make the next year, you will still get that reduced amount for the preschool, the daycare. So a lot of people, maybe I need to go back and add those forms and documents again. It's in one of my older videos. But many people seem to forget or not even consider that there are options out there for people to assist with health care. And it's not blasted all over social media. Like, that's private. It's usually kept pretty private. And so anyway, it's just something else to consider and to think about. But those relationships and conversations would have come across so much easier if both Chris and Shanann felt as if they could talk freely to the parents of each other. And Shanann, from the jump, did not feel liked and approved or appreciated by the Watts. And, they loved the Ruseks loved Chris, but it goes both ways. I can love you unconditionally. It does not mean that you're not going to make a mistake. I love my children unconditionally. It does not mean that I don't tell them when they're wrong. And there has to be a respect there and a mutual respect. And in my opinion, it goes all the way back to before Shanae and Chris ever met. And that, in my opinion, is where it goes for us parents. It has to start at home. You have to be having these conversations with your teenagers. They want to, literally, I have a 15-year-old in high school right now. He's a football player, good-looking kid, and oh my gosh, these kids these days they have apps. I mean, I've had to literally lock down so many off of the cell phone, but they have apps where they're meeting friends from different schools so that they don't have to talk to people in their high school. I mean, that's literally the society that we're living in right now. So these children can, and they are still children, they're teenagers, but these teenagers are having conversations, getting to know these complete strangers for kids, and they're hiding it. Mine was out of ignorance. I didn't know about these apps until I do random checks on my son's phone with his permission, and he sees it and he knows it. I don't even want to say like with his permission. I'm like, hey, hand me your phone, and it gets handed to mom. But I was doing a random check, and I'm like, hey, what's this app? And what's this app? And he was telling me, and then I had, obviously start doing some research and digging and realizing, I mean, these things are so dangerous. And not to get off on a PSA about the teenager apps, but it's important because it ties right into communication. And the swipe right, swipe left dating world that we're in, it is awful because people are only getting to know others on a superficial level. You're getting that immediate high of lust and just love bombing, if you will. Not all the time, but it is a rush. It's like it's a high and a rush, and then once it dies down, it's done. There's no commitment. There's no, they don't want to label anything. It's literally so different than how even when I was in high school. And why does this matter? This matters because guess what? As soon as someone says something they don't like, they don't talk to them anymore. As soon as, you'll have one girl who will be talking to 3 boys, and it's like, oh, they're friends. No, they're talking about completely inappropriate things to be just friends. And so, I mean, there are so many conversations to have with your teenagers about what does it mean to actually be a friend? How do you actually build friendships? What does that look like? Oh, your friend got on your nerves today? Okay, so how do you work through it? Teach them how to problem solve. And a lot of this is stuff that we would think that they learn early on, but the more electronics come into play with this, the more their attention spans are shortening, their temperaments are shortening, and so it truly is becoming an exercise just to teach a teenager how to get a handle on their emotions. And this is not the same as like when we were teenagers and someone pissed you off. It was like you knew if you got in a fight or if you did something, if you lashed out, you were going to get in trouble. And you weren't just going to get in trouble at school, you were going to get in trouble at home. And these days, these kids don't care because there are no consequences. And then we wonder why they grow up and we're seeing this. And that's not to say, oh, so-and-so's parents were, no, because there's a fine line between how much you can do parenting and then what your children ultimately decide to do as adults. But there is a common ground there. And unfortunately seeing the nuclear family unit deteriorating and the communication barrier. I mean, we can connect with so many people, but we don't know how to communicate. And having that breakdown across the board between adults, teenagers, families. I mean, you've got mothers who don't even talk to their kids. You've got fathers and mothers who are so disassociated from their own kids, like they don't even feel their pain. And everyone wants to hide behind their keyboards and judge everybody, but be a part of the solution. You know, the next time you see a teenager about to lose their mind over something, cause them to pause. Ask them, do you think this is a healthy way to approach this? And yeah, they're going to look at you like you've lost your mind and like you're stupid. But when you work with them through a problem and they get a smart, well thought out resolution instead of an impulsive decision in another problem, then it causes them, it starts training them, hey, pause for just a minute. Pause for just a minute. And it seems small. It seems so small, guys, but it is so big. So big. And if you have teenagers, I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. And just because you think your kid is, oh, my daughter's a great girl, she tells me everything, my son's a great boy, he never gets in trouble, don't think for a second these kids don't know what they're doing. My son, like I said, plays football. My niece is a cheerleader. So my bestie and I are usually we're always in the stands on Friday nights. And we're sitting up there and we have a couple of girls sitting in front of us. And this one girl, we knew she had lost her phone because she had sent out a Snapchat to everybody saying, well, there goes my phone, I'm grounded. So then she was grounded because she had one of those friend downloaded, or one of those friend apps downloaded. And this girl, I kid you not, got that phone back, and literally within 10 minutes of her mom handing her her phone, she re-downloaded the app and started carrying on that conversation like it never ended. I mean, they think they're being sneaky and they're learning all about it. And it's really concerning if you think about it when there's apps like the calculator app, where when you first look on your kid's phone, is it really the calculator or is it the hidden app? So kind of turned into more of like a parenting thing, but it's because genuinely the bigger problems in a marriage and in a relationship, those are things that require communication. And while so many people can't stand to pick apart the gray areas, it's so important because it's not excusing one way or the other. But what I will tell you is it does build and build and build. And if you are not prepared for how to manage resentment, disappointment, failure, financial distress, emotional distress from a problematic marriage, children, everything else. I mean, no one is perfect, but you've got to know when to speak up. You've got to know when to ask for help, and you got to know when to humble yourself and do those things so that it doesn't lead to Chris Watts annihilating his family, so that it doesn't lead, my daddy always said 2 wrongs don't make a right, and I always hated it when he would say that. But it's not okay to say, well, so-and-so did this or so-and-so did that. No, you got to know when to let go. You got to know when to fight, when to move on. And it's a delicate balance. But that's why teaching our children to have solid friendships, building solid relationships, and we can mirror that in our relationship with our children and with our nieces and our nephews, because not every child has to be your son or daughter. Maybe you're in a position of leadership. Maybe you teach Sunday school on Sundays. Maybe you lead a reading group. You never know who you're mentoring and who's listening. And you never know who needed that extra little bit of patience that you had with them. So I challenge you, take a moment and just kind of let some of this sink in with you. And I'd love to hear your comments and your thoughts on this in the comment section. But again, I'm learning as I go. I'm constantly reflecting, reevaluating as my children have grown now into young adulthood. And man, I can tell you, I love it because it's a completely different season, and it's one that my own mom, who was my best friend, never really talked to me about. And I really am appreciating this time, especially with my 19-year-old and my 15-year-old, because they're both learning that, yes, I'm always going to be mom. However, our relationship is evolving, it's growing, and it's changing. And therefore, the subject matter that we can talk about and the depth we can talk about it is evolving and changing. And so that has just opened up so many other doors and windows of conversation and communication that it's been wonderful. And I know it's been working well for my boys. It's been working well for my nieces. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't get on your nerves sometimes. But listen, with God, all things are possible. He gives us strength. And if you don't believe, I believe enough for both of us. So if you ever need a prayer, just drop it in the comments and I will get that one sent up for you. But that's going to do it for this episode of Car Ride Conversations.